When we talk about research, we have several priorities. We talked on Monday about these threads that we try to pull through. We talked about application, we talked about continuums, we talked about ethics, right? And we also talked about diversity. When we conduct research, anytime we do a study on something, we need to make sure that we're really clear about what we're studying. So we focus a lot of time and energy working on what we call operational definitions. Now, operational definitions are descriptions of what and how we are measuring the phenomenon that we're interested in. Okay, so if I were to say, I'm going to study love. Okay, let's say that that's what I'm going to study. I'm going to study love. How many different conceptualizations are there of love, right? Pop something into the chat, right? How would you conceive of love? How would you measure love? What would it look like? Go ahead and pop into the chat how you would define love. Love is a relationship, connection, affection, trust, amount of time that you spend, familiarity, honesty, intimacy, feeling, effort, communication, pleasure. Love is unconditional, right? All of the above. So when we talk about operationally defining something, we have to narrow that down, right? Because I might use a wholly different conceptualization of love than you do. So if I'm a good researcher, I'm going to say, I am studying companionate love, right? Which according to developmental theories is the love that happens later on in life once we surpass periods of time where we have a great degree of chemistry and passion and things like that. And we really start to develop a relationship that is recentered on friendship and about companionship. And so I want to study companionate love. Okay, so it's not just enough for me to say companionate love. Who do I want to do companionate love between? Because you can have companionate love with somebody who's considered a romantic partner versus somebody who's considered a platonic partner. Okay, whether or not there's any sexual relationship in there at all, it's not going to dictate that relationship. So that's going to qualify that relationship even more. So the what is companionate love, and I would say between friends, right? Gender would matter, gender identity and gender would matter. Sex and gender would matter. And then I would also want to maybe look at how long they've been friends, right? So when we do operational definitions, we're really trying to narrow down as far as we can, as much as we can, the concept that we're interested in. So that when somebody else comes along to replicate our study, which if you guys remember from the scientific method is the holy grail, right? That's the last thing you do is you look to replicate. You want to write your research science up clearly enough so that people want to do your study, they can do your study again, and they don't have to guess at what anything means. So we create a really detailed operational definition, and then we need to talk about how we're going to measure it, right? How many different ways do you think we can measure love? Some people had mentioned amount of time, communication, right? It could be how often you provide instrumental support. It might be how often you're physically affectionate. In this operational definition, we need to be able to also say how we are going to measure what we're looking at. So in any science, you're going to see a clear conceptualization of the phenomenon of interest and how we actually measure that. And that's that operational definition, critical, like the lowest hanging fruit on our research design. Sometimes the clicker works, sometimes it doesn't. In addition to operational definitions, another aspect of research that we, of course, utilize very frequently are experiments. Now, one of our research learning objectives today is to be able to differentiate. Experiments occur when there is some manipulation. Now, if I were to survey you guys right now, and I were to say, this isn't obviously psychologically grounded, but if I were to survey you right now and I would say, what's your Wi-Fi connectivity like? Okay. If I were to survey you and ask you that, that's not an experiment. That's actually what we call a correlational descriptive study. Now, if I were to cut off the Wi-Fi on this half, right, sections 7 and 8 and 29 and 30, if I were to cut off the Wi-Fi receivers that feed to this part of the stadium, but leave the other ones on, that would be an experiment because I've done a manipulation. I have constrained the environment. I have changed the environment. Other very common experiments that we talk about a lot are interventions where somebody is, you know, suffering, or let's say a student intervention for studying, right? So students really struggling with a class. An intervention that we might employ is I might offer an hour of review in the arena prior to the final, okay? And everybody gets that. And I give you a pre-test first, and then we do the review, and then I give you a post-test, okay? That's still not an experiment, okay? It's, pardon me, it's still not a full experiment, right? I'm still testing something, I'm still asking questions, but really it's still just a correlational and descriptive study. An experiment would be if I hold this hour of review and I, what could I do? And I hold this hour of review and I schedule it during a time that's really obnoxious, like 6:30 a.m. So only people who are willing to get up and come into this space at 6:30 a.m. are going to receive this. And I know people are going to self-select into that obnoxious time. And by the way, your brain doesn't work very well at that time of day. I know most of you already feel that and know that, okay? But science definitely supports it. So, and then I offer another review session, let's say it's 6:30 at night, right? Equally awful, if you can believe it, equally awful in regards to cognitive capacity. And I know students are going to self-select into each one of those times. And then I give you a pre-test and a post-test. Because I've manipulated, right, the offerings, because I've constrained it and not allowed people to have equal access to both offerings, fundamentally, I'm already creating different groups. So when we asked you for your choose your own adventure to get ready for today, to write up your own hypothesis or scientific statement, really what you're laying out there, because you identified an independent and dependent variable, you are writing about an experiment. A descriptive or a correlational study is one that we conduct just in natural occurrences without really trying to manipulate any factors. So I could survey the Wi-Fi. I could survey your first week in the semester. I could just ask you, how are things going? You know, what does that look like? And we call that correlational and descriptive because we're just asking you about natural occurrences. We're not constraining the environments at all. So when we talk about experiments, we are definitely talking about manipulation. Now, I already mentioned this, but I'm going to highlight it again, independent and dependent variables. I know that you guys have already spent some time on this. You've watched some videos. You've created one yourself. Okay, we're going to debrief on those here in just a minute. I'm also going to take you through some examples. The reason why being able to identify an independent and dependent variable is important is because as a consumer, right, as a consumer, somebody who is maybe considering taking medications, maybe wondering if an intervention for your child that the school is proposing would actually be effective. Understanding independent and dependent variables lets you understand what's being manipulated, what the experimental factors are, and what the expected outcomes are. So we're going to give this one a shot, okay? There will be a statistically significant difference in graduation rates of at-risk high school seniors who participate in an intensive study program, as opposed to at-risk high school seniors who do not participate in the intensive study program. Now I want you to go ahead, for yourself, identify the independent and dependent variable. Researcher wanted to know whether the number of people present would influence subject's judgment on a simple perceptual task. In each case, the other members of the group gave an incorrect answer. The researcher then noted whether the subject conformed to the group's decision.